October 17, 1996. Cumbria, England. On a misty morning, the wooden door of an outhouse in the Acland family garden creaked open. Inside, Chris Acland, drummer of Lush, had taken his own life. The press reported it briefly, a death with no sign of foul play, just a few cold lines, but those lines were never enough. In the official reports, there was a silence no one could fill, a whisper that he had left behind a note. Its contents were never made public. No one confirmed it, and no one denied it. That uncertainty has kept his memory unsettled. A man who once gave his band such gentle rhythm had left in silence, with only fragments behind. What truly happened behind that wooden door? And if that piece of paper really existed, what words did it carry? Stay with me as we trace the scattered memories of Chris Acland. Chapter 1. From Tokyo's bright lights to death in an outhouse. Tokyo nights, September 1996. A small room in Shinjuku, glowing with neon. Thousands of hands clapping, cheers blending with music. On stage, Chris Acland sat behind his drums. He lowered his head slightly, smiled, and struck the first beat. Steady, crisp, gentle. Everyone leaned into that rhythm to fly. Can you imagine it? A man who never fought for the spotlight, yet was the heartbeat holding it all together. That night felt like a postcard. Everything dazzling, everything seemingly complete. But only 29 days later, in faraway Cumbria, the wooden door of an outhouse was opened. Inside, silence. The press wrote, Chris Acland, drummer of Lush, found hanged in an outhouse at his parents' home. Just a short report. Cold, dry. Enough to close a file, not enough to explain anything. Then the details grew messy. The British papers wrote Burneside, a small village near Kendal. Some foreign outlets mistakenly wrote London. Others simply called it Kendal. Small differences, but enough to blur collective memory, like a photograph fogged with breath. And in that haze, people began to ask, did he leave behind a note? A final word? Officially, nothing was ever published. One friend said they never saw such a thing. Another whispered, if it existed, it stayed within the family. No one confirmed. No one denied. The gap was wide enough for memory to invent its own last line. The only certainties are two anchors, Tokyo and Cumbria. In between were flights, identical hotel nights, a brief meeting about taking a break. For the band, it was rest. For someone who had always held the rhythm for everyone else, that pause may have felt like a wall. According to one family member, in his final days, Chris didn't complain, didn't lash out. He just grew quieter, slept more, moved slower. Have you ever watched someone you love turn inward like that? No alarms, just a heartbeat fading. What's striking is that on stage, Chris was always cheerful. He joked, talked football, chuckled when friends stumbled. But off stage, he rarely spoke about himself. I'm fine. Don't worry. A short phrase to end the subject. The man who kept rhythm for everyone else sometimes had none left to hold for himself. That morning in Cumbria, the wooden door opened with a faint creak. From that moment, it was no longer just a door. It became a symbol of a void no one could fill. And the question still lingers to this day. In those 29 days, what left him first? His strength, his joy, or the small hope he never found words to share? Chapter 2. A safe childhood, but a tragic end. In the Lake District, mornings often began with mist clinging to the windows. Rolling hills stretched wide, silver light shimmered across the lakes, and the small streets seemed unchanged from year to year. In this quiet setting, Chris Acland grew up. There was no crushing poverty, no storm of family conflict. His background was stable: good schools, respectable parents, a safe foundation. Yet for an artist, safety is only a beginning, never a guarantee of happiness. From an early age, Chris was drawn to the drums. His first beats were uneven, noisy, but they made him smile. Patiently, he learned to keep his hands steady, not too tight, not too loose. Watch him closely, and you'd see it. Always neat, just enough to lift the music, never pushing for attention. His personality mirrored that style: gentle, willing to step back, letting others move forward. Friends from his teenage years remembered him as open but never flashy. At gatherings, he often laughed the loudest, then stayed behind to help clean up. One recalled, "He had this way of making everyone feel at ease, but when you asked about himself, he'd just say, 'I'm fine.'" That quiet refusal made it hard for anyone to press further. When he moved to London for school, Chris stepped into another world, a crowded, noisy city, but also a place full of opportunity. There, he met Miki Berenyi, the vibrant, red-haired girl who shared his passion for music. They quickly became friends, then shared a brief romance. It was not dramatic, not scandalous, just two young people bound by rhythm. Later, when tragedy came, Miki would recall it with a soft sadness. That quiet connection never entirely disappeared. Beyond music, Chris was a devoted Tottenham Hotspur supporter. Sometimes he and his friends played harmless pranks around football, a way to hold on to everyday life amid the touring schedule. While other artists were swept away by the spotlight, he could still laugh about a good match or a missed kick. Those small details showed that Chris never let go of a certain boyish innocence. One friend said Chris hated to trouble anyone. When he was tired, he simply shrugged. When he felt down, he changed the subject. If something was hard to say, he kept it to himself. On stage, his drumming gave the whole band confidence, but off stage, his silence left others unsure of what he really felt. That was the paradox. The man who held the rhythm for everyone else often hid his own. There were subtle changes no one recorded clearly. Longer silences than usual, conversations left unfinished. They were not enough to draw conclusions, but enough to make people wonder later. Between laughter and rhythm, there may have been moments when he stepped just slightly farther away. The picture remains of a boy from the lakes, kind, modest, steady on the drums, carrying a sense of lightness. But later, the word outhouse would come up again and again, and no one knew when that quiet sadness began to travel with him, unnoticed. Chapter 3. The Price of Success Finds Chris. By the early 1990s, Lush had secured their place. Their first EPs carried the hazy, drifting sound of shoegaze. Then came Spooky, and later, Lovelife. Their name began appearing on magazine covers, alongside words that praised and mocked in equal measure. Critics called their music light, dreamy, even dessert, at the noisy Britpop feast of England. On paper, their rank was rising, but beneath the stage, fatigue was already seeping into the encore. Shoegaze was being pushed aside, while Britpop dominated the center. The media favored conflict, sharp opinions, and bold headlines. A band with two women in front drew extra scrutiny over gender. The questions rarely focused on rhythm or harmony. Instead, reporters asked about appearance, about attitude, about whether they were fiery enough to compete with Britpop. Chris stayed behind the drums, rarely in interviews, but he could not avoid the atmosphere. The shows piled up, flights to America blurred together, hotels repeated until every city felt the same. Some nights, they shared the bill with bands that did not fit, leaving behind an unsettled tone. One member of the crew remembered, after a few weeks, everyone was exhausted. Even the laughter sounded like work. Through it all, Chris kept the beat steady. A nod at the right time, a clean drop of rhythm in the right place. But backstage, his silences stretched longer. Sometimes he stood quietly alone, staring at the street. No one kept notes of those moments. In the middle of the tour schedule were hours no one remembered, a missed call, a sleepless night, a skipped breakfast. Not enough to explain anything, but enough to make people pause, years later, and wonder. The pressure was not only from the press, it showed in daily life. Mismatched shows made everyone more discouraged. After performances, the air grew heavier. Even the usual laughter sounded forced, like a habit instead of joy. Piece by piece, it created a feeling. The group was worn down, and the man keeping time was slipping into his own shadow. Outside, the charts kept climbing. Singles rose higher, tickets sold out, crowds sang along. The press called it a golden moment. But inside, endurance was stretched to the limit. The schedule was punishing. The rest, too, short. Exhaustion no longer just personal, but collective. Chris still played on, still gave the band their anchor. Yet the growing silences were beginning to tell another story. As the band was hailed for reaching its peak, deep within the drummer who carried them, something else may have already begun to fall. Chapter 4. The Pause. Meeting and the Unexpected Fall. It was a small meeting. The room was not large, the windows shut tight. On the table lay a few tour schedules, still unmarked. No one raised their voice. Just one suggestion was spoken. What if we take a break? The tone was calm, but in that room, the words carried more weight than a crashing drum. The long tour schedule had drained everyone. Shows in America were mismatched, audiences unpredictable, while the press kept waiting for the next sensation, something Lush never wanted to chase. Everyone was tired. Everyone knew that if they kept going, there would be nothing left. But saying rest also meant leaving an unfinished sentence. Would they come back? How long would it take? And if they did return, would they still be the same? Chris sat quietly. He did not object, did not press forward. One bandmate remembered he simply nodded, gave a faint smile, and said, "All right." It was his familiar way, gentle, meant to keep others at ease. But what he was truly thinking, no one knew. In the days after that meeting, an unexpected emptiness opened. The schedule that had once been relentless suddenly became blank. No more constant travel. No more early mornings for flights. For many, it was rest. But for some, that space became a place where one could slip. A relative recalled that Chris went back to Cumbria. He spent time with his family, spoke a little, nothing unusual. He gave no complaints, showed no signs of panic, just quieter, slower, less talk. Small details that, at the time, no one thought twice about. But later, they felt like folds in a map pointing towards something unseen. In those weeks, hours slipped into blank spaces. A morning slept too long. A dinner left unfinished. A phone call unanswered. Each on its own, ordinary. But pieced together, they painted something different. A scattered silence that no one could explain. The irony was clear. The meeting had been meant to save the band's health. But for Chris, that pause may have left him feeling out of rhythm. On stage, at least there was a drum beat to hold on to. Off stage, there was nothing left to grasp. Later, one member reflected, "We thought rest would help." None of us realized the empty space could be the most dangerous thing of all. And so the question remains, was the decision to step back meant to keep them safe, or did it quietly place Chris at the edge of a cliff no one else could see? Chapter 5. Silence Behind the Wooden Door. The Note No One Has Seen. That October morning, Cumbria was colder than usual. The Acland garden lay under a thin layer of mist. A relative opened the wooden door of the outhouse on the property. Inside was complete silence. Chris was found hanging. The news spread quickly that day. The official statement was brief. Police confirmed no foul play. Newspapers wrote, "In an outhouse at his parents' home." The location was stated clearly, yet some foreign papers confused it. Some wrote London, others Kendal. A small error, but enough to blur the collective memory, like a photograph fogged with breath. Then came another detail, harder to hold on to. Some said he left a note. But to this day, its contents have never been released. No mainstream paper ever confirmed it. One person insisted they had never seen such a thing. Another whispered that if it existed, it remained within the family. That uncertainty became a wide gap, a silence filled with speculation. According to his cousin, in the days before his death, Chris never spoke words of despair. He was simply quieter, smiled less, slept more. No drama, no obvious signs, which made his death even harder to explain. It came like a sudden gust rattling through a house, the door banging once, then silence. In those final weeks, hours slipped into blank spaces. A meal left unfinished, a phone call unanswered, an afternoon spent alone in his room. Each detail, ordinary by itself, but when placed together, they formed a jagged outline, difficult to read, impossible to ignore. The bitter irony was that Chris died just as the band had agreed to take a break. That meeting was meant to preserve their health, but the stillness that followed became the most dangerous part. During the tour, he had his drums to anchor him. In silence, there was nothing to hold. That day, after the wooden door swung open, everything changed. For his family, even the sight of a rope or a door could never again be ordinary. For his friends, every later conversation circled back to the same regret. Why didn't anyone notice sooner? And for the public, the hardest question remains. If a note really existed, what did it say? And if no note was ever written, then was the silence itself his final answer? Chapter 6. A Song of Remembrance, An Empty Chair Forever. Many years after that October morning, Chris's bandmates decided to step onto the stage again, not to replace him, only to fill a space too large to ignore. They released a new EP, and among the songs was one called Lost Boy. Its lyrics were gentle, the melody drifting like smoke. The name Chris was never spoken, but the audience understood immediately. It was for him, for the cheerful, kind-hearted man who now lived only as a shadow in collective memory. In the studio, the new drummer slowed the rhythm slightly at a transition. No one mentioned it, but everyone felt it. A pause, a space quietly reserved for Chris. On stage, the empty stool behind the old drum kit left fans in silence. One wrote later, "That emptiness said more than any lyric ever could." When 20 years had passed, tributes appeared everywhere. A video replay of Sweetness and Light carried a line of text, "Remembering Chris Acland." Below it, the comments overflowed with memories. Someone recalled the first time they met him at a small show. Another remembered the last glimpse of him smiling backstage. All the stories shared the same thread: his warmth. People did not remember Chris for grand words. They remembered the quiet kindness that made them feel steady. Later, a music compilation appeared with small letters on the cover, dedicated to Chris. A documentary stitched together old Super 8 reels, scenes of him joking in a waiting room, of the band crammed into a tour van, of Chris nodding his head to count the beat. Fragments, perhaps, but enough for viewers to hold on to him a little longer. As if the man who kept the rhythm had not gone, but had simply chosen to stand still so others could move ahead. In collective memory, Chris became the picture of someone gentle but steady. His music did not shout, did not seek attention, yet it lingered. For the band, he remained the quiet heartbeat. For the audience, he was proof that sometimes just being there, keeping time for others, can become its own legacy. Perhaps that is the only way to keep someone alive, to leave a space open on the stage so that everyone who enters the room still hears a faint drumbeat within themselves. Conclusion: the legacy of a gentle rhythm. Chris Acland died in October of 1996, when Lush still had plans unfinished. In the newspapers, his death was confined to a few short lines, but for his family, his friends, and his audience, it became a void that nothing could fill. What he left behind was not measured by chart positions. It lived in the way he kept time, so others could keep going. Chris was never the loudest presence, never chasing the spotlight. He was the steady heartbeat in the background. And when that heartbeat stopped, only then did everyone realize how essential it had been. Fans still recall him through small details: a soft smile, a nod of encouragement, a sure strike of the drum. In the loud age of Britpop, his quiet steadiness became the lasting anchor. His death also spoke volumes about its time. Shoegaze had been swept aside, Britpop had risen to the front. The media thrived on conflict and bold headlines. A band with two women in the spotlight was scrutinized even more. And the one who held the rhythm at the back, like Chris, was nearly erased from the story. The pressure was not one dramatic event, but endless flights, relentless schedules, and laughter that became routine. That is why his legacy carries a reminder. The person who always says, "I'm fine," may be the very one who needs to be heard the most. The one who holds the rhythm for everyone else may also need someone to hold it for him. 2 decades later, people still turn to Lost Boy, Sweetness and Light, or the grainy frames of old Super 8 film. Songs that never spoke his name, yet left spaces in the melody meant only for Chris. Somehow, his rhythm still echoes in those who remember. No note has ever been published to explain everything. What remains are scattered clues, warm memories, and a silence that cannot be filled. And perhaps it is that very silence that keeps his memory so deeply alive. The final question, nearly 30 years later, still lingers. If another door had opened for him that day, gentler, easier, would Chris have chosen to walk through it? And today, when we think of him, what keeps us from asking the same question about those still silent around us?